elections, and MP Indira Singh will also be looking at some other areas relating to the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. So on Wednesday, the House of Representatives was given notice that this coming Wednesday, the Prime Minister will pilot the draft order relating to the Tobago House of Assembly elections, and the members of the House of Representatives were provided with the 13th report of the Elections and Boundaries Commission, which outlines the new boundaries for the Tobago electoral districts, where the Parliament would have made an amendment to the THA Act, increasing the number of seats from 12 to 15. Now, the position of the opposition in that debate was that that was not the solution. However, the Prime Minister saw it fit that the increased seats will in fact break the deadlock. Now, it is against our democracy and the tenets of our democracy that 41 persons in Port of Spain will decide the political future of 51,000 voters in Tobago. And from considering the EBC 13th report, which I have a copy of, the EBC added 3 additional seats to Tobago. And those 3 seats, I will later in my presentation, I will give you how the boundaries the boundaries were shifted to create these 3 new seats. And while the opposition is here to ensure that we hold not only the government but other constitutional authorities accountable, I am not here to cast any aspersions on any person or member of the EBC, but we need answers to questions. Why after the boundary change there has been a clear advantage to one political party? It is glaring from looking at this report, the 13th report of the Elections and Boundaries Commission of the Tobago, upcoming THA election, that one political party will in fact gain an unfair advantage in any election. In the last THA elections, there were 4 political parties and 2 independent candidates, with a total of 28 nominated candidates to contest that election. And now we are seeing that only one political party will in fact gain an unfair advantage, and not because of their performance, but rather on the new boundary changes in the arrangement of the seats. And I can anticipate that on Wednesday, the Prime Minister, who is the political leader of the People's National Movement, a party that contested the THA election, will come on Wednesday to in fact defend these boundary changes. And the Prime Minister will boast of his Tobago heritage. But I will just like to remind the population that Judas was a disciple of Jesus. Judas betrayed Jesus, so I'm asking Dr. Rowley, don't betray the people of Tobago. And the UNC, they will say we did not contest the election, and that is a fact. But the United National Congress, we hold no brief for any political party, but we as the official opposition have to uphold the law and the Constitution. We are the elected members of the House of Representatives who have to debate that order. And we will stand in the way on any attack on our democracy. Our democracy did not come free or easy for it to be eroded in such an obscene manner. And regardless of your political affiliation, this is a matter of utmost importance. In the last election, the January 2021 THA election, 25% of Tobagonians voted for the PNM. As such, the PNM has no authority to speak for all Tobagonians. And I may not have been born in Tobago, but I am a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, and I will fight for justice and fairness for my brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago. So, as I move on, going into the particular issues relating to the law and the shifts in the boundary, the first issue I would like to raise is that the increase in the number of seats from 12 to 15 was not done in an ordinary manner. So I can give you some background of how it works. Before an election, a draft order will come to the Parliament, and in this case with the THA, every 4 years the report will come to the Parliament, and the report will indicate to the Parliament whether or not there needs to be any increases in the number of seats based on the population size. When the EBC published the order last year, which was debated last year in the Parliament for the elections to be held in January 2021, no recommendation was made by the EBC for there to have been an increase in the number of seats in Tobago from 12 to 15. So let us get that absolutely clear. There was no recommendation by the EBC to the Parliament that there needs to be an increase in the number of seats in Tobago. They indicated that the elections can in fact be held properly with the 12 existing seats. Now, under the Constitution, the EBC is meant to be an independent institution. And Section 71 of the Constitution says that in the exercise of the EBC's function, it shall not be subject to the direction and control of any other person or authority. But in this case, we have seen that the 2021 amendment that was passed in the Parliament this year by the PNM to increase the number of seats from 12 to 15 was in fact a direction being given by the Parliament and the government, who has the majority, to the EBC. While the Constitution is telling the government that you cannot direct the EBC on how to do its job. Then the law that governs the division and the delimitation of the boundaries is the Elections and Boundaries Commission, Local Government and Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2505. And in this piece of law, it says that the Commission shall define and review the boundaries of the electoral districts into which an electoral area is to be divided, and the EBC will submit to the Minister, in this case the Minister of Local Government, a report showing the constituencies into which it recommends that an electoral area should be divided in order to give effect of the rule. So the law is telling the government that the EBC will tell them when it is time to increase the number of seats. But in this case, it happens in the reverse. The government is telling the EBC how many seats it wants in Tobago, from 12 to 15. So that's one point, that the government has in fact been instructing the Elections and Boundaries Commission via simple majority legislation in the Parliament. Now, the second issue is that Dr. Rowley, in 2012, when there was a THA election and this boundary matter was also being debated in the Parliament, November 2012, Dr. Rowley, who was the opposition leader then, indicated that they should not have 15 seats, but they should have 13 seats. Now that has changed, because he anticipated a deadlock at 6-6. And this is what he said. So it might be that sometime in the not too distant future, the Commission may want to consider 13 seats in Tobago, so as to ensure that there is always a clear winner and that a tie is not the outcome of any election. The same Dr. Rowley who came to the Parliament and increased the seats to 15 was in 2012 saying we should only increase it to 13. When this matter came towards the Parliament, there were several persons who came out and condemned the actions of the government by increasing the number of seats, and in particular one, Dr. Winford James. And then you would have heard that the opposition leader would have advanced a solution to the 6-6 deadlock, in which the THA Act allows for the House of Representatives standing orders to be used by drawing of lots in order to break the deadlock, so you did not have to in fact increase the number of seats. That is the position that we had outlined when this matter came towards the attention of the population. So now, here we are, 25th of January 2021, an election was held. The results of that election was that the the PNM gained 6 seats out of the 12, and the PDP gained the remaining 6 out of the 12. And the deadlock came, and the Prime Minister, as I said, increased the number of seats. And in that motion, when we were debating in January, he indicated that he was also satisfied with the boundaries based on the report given by the EBC with the 12 seats. And now he increased it to 15. Subsequently, the Amendment Act to the Amendment Act was proclaimed, and before us now is the draft order together with the 13th report of the new boundary changes. So I just want to indicate that based on the analysis of the data, when you look at the 15 seats now and you plug the data from the 2021 elections, the January 2021 elections, into the new 15-seat arrangement, from a 6-6 deadlock, you will now have the PNM gaining 9 of the seats based on those results, and the PDP gaining 6 of the seats of the 15 seats. Right? So that is based on the results of the 2021 general election being plugged into the 15-seat arrangement now. When you look at the report, the 13th report of the THA, the boundary report, when you look at this report, they used every single seat that the PNM won, the 6 seats that the PNM won, to cut those seats to make the 3 additional seats. So the 6 PNM seats that they won in January 2021, were used to create the 3 additional seats. When you look again and plug the data from the January 2021 election, the 3 new seats that were created will all, based on the numbers, gives an advantage to the People's National Movement. So based on the 2021 results, the PNM will have an advantage in those seats, meaning that they will gain the higher number of votes in those seats based on 2021 results and the arrangement of the new boundaries of the 3 seats. The 3 seats are Darrell, Spring, Wim, Lambo Lowlands, and Mount St. George, Goodwood. So I went through the EBC report to really find out, well, how did you what was the methodology used in order to cut these new seats and create these 3 additional electoral districts? So let's start with the first one. I'm calling it the 13th district, which is the Darrell Spring Wim seat. So the EBC said that the creation of District 13 was driven by using the highest electorate. So they looked at all the seats, the 12 seats, and they pulled out the one with the highest number of voters, the highest electorate, and that being the Blackrock Wim Spring Garden seat. So from that seat, they pulled out 1, 2, 3, 4 polling divisions, and then they pulled out 1 polling division from the Scarborough-Calder Hall seat. Both seats being won by the People's National Movement. And if you watch the map here, right, I have a map, and when you look at the map, you will see the 2 seats here, seat number, the Blackrock and the Scarborough-Calder Hall seat. So these 2 seats here in the red area will now be divided. So these 1, 2 seats will be divided to create 3 seats. So that's the first one. Again, with the new arrangement in that seat, the PNM seems to be gaining an advantage. Now we're going into District 14. So again, the EBC outlined that we divided these 3 seats. So now the electorate in those 3 seats would have decreased because you would have pulled out votes from those 2 seats to create a 3rd seat. So then they looked now and they analyzed the data again and see, well, which seat had the higher number of votes based on the 1st division. So they looked at the Lambo Signal Hill seat, the Boku Mount Pleasant seat, and the Canaan Bonaccord seat. So these are these 3 seats here on the western part of the island. Again, 1, 2, 3 seats being red seats, seats that would have been won by the People's National Movement in the 2021 THA election. And based on these 3 seats, they pulled out polling divisions from these 3 seats to create district number 14. Again, when you look at the data, it seems that the PNM will gain an unfair advantage in district number 14. So the EBC all of the time creating district number 13 and 14 were using the highest number of voters based on the arrangement of the seat. Now what was strange is that when they reached district number 15, I will read exactly what the EBC said. The electorate was again reanalyzed following the creation of district number 14, identifying Providence, Mason Hall, Moriah as having the highest electorate. So Providence now would have had the highest electorate, and its neighboring district of Goodwood, Bell Garden West would then have had the second highest number of voters in the electorate. The latter was identified, meaning Goodwood, for the creation of District 15 to avoid fragmenting communities within Providence, Mason Hall, Moriah, which are more linearly distributed along roadways which also form the polling division boundaries. So let me explain what the EBC said here now. So all of the time they were using the seat with the highest number of voters. And when they reached district number 15 now, well, the seat that had the highest number of voters being the Providence seat, they said, no, we're not using that seat anymore. Because what will happen is that we will fragment communities. So they didn't use the seat with the higher number of voters now, but they went to another seat with the second highest number of voters. But all of the time you were using the seats with the highest number of voters. So we see the clear inconsistency in the approach in the division of the boundaries. So let's examine this particular seat now, district number 15. So they took out polling divisions from Goodwood, Bell Garden West, 2 polling divisions, this being a seat won by the PDP. And then they took out 2 polling divisions from the Bacolet, Mount St. George district, creating district number 15. When you look at the numbers, the PNM numbers is superior than the PDP numbers. It's higher than the PDP numbers. So again, we see the unfair advantage being given in this. And this is the Providence seat here, which had the highest number of voters, and this is the Goodwood seat. So they didn't want to take out numbers from here. They could have very well shift boundaries here, but they went and shift boundaries in this way. This Providence seat was in fact a seat that is more marginal. The Goodwood seat, the PDP had a clear or a larger margin of victory. So therefore weakening the PDP seat by removing 2 of their strongest polling divisions and putting it in district number 15, which is now going to be a seat that may be won by the PNM based on the division of the boundaries. And this is why we call for fairness and equality when it comes to election and the limitation of boundaries. The EBC's approach in this particular matter is extremely inconsistent. It is worrying and it is dangerous for our democracy. At the end of the day, it is the voice of the people. But when you create arrangements like these, like we are seeing here, it becomes very dangerous for our democracy. And when we look at this piecemeal approach that the EBC took with respect to the division of the boundaries and the creation of these new seats, we must ask the EBC, why not a complete overall of the entire island was done to properly analyze all of the polling divisions and see whether or not you could have, why you only touched this part of the island and not this part of the island? Why did you touch the Tobago West part of the island and not the Tobago East part of the island? There's only one area in which the seats were created, and why you did not do an entire analysis of the entire Tobago Island before you come to report to the Parliament on just splitting the seats in a very inconsistent, worrying manner. We as the opposition will ventilate these matters in the parliament and ensure that our democracy, which is under threat by the PNM, is protected from this rogue government called the PNM, led by the Honorable Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. And I thank you very much. I now hand you over to Mr. Indar Singh.
Thank you very much, my parliamentary colleague, the member for Sabah Barataria, MP Saddam Hussein. As we continue with this morning's press conference, as it relates to focusing on the PNM sustained attack on our constitution, our parliamentary democracy, and the processes really existing within the parliamentary framework of Trinidad and Tobago. And as I extend my pleasantries this morning to members of the media and Trinidad and Tobago, I want to take the opportunity this morning to speak directly and specifically to the over 2,000 employees or workers who are employed at the Board of Inland Revenue and the Customs and Excise Division of the Ministry of Finance, and their respective families, and the tax-paying fraternity of Trinidad and Tobago, and the wider citizenry of the country. And the focus here this morning is based on the United Nations Congress historical position and our philosophical approach on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority from the point of view of our position through the political leader and opposition leader, the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to make it very clear from the outset that we have been historically and philosophically opposed to the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority in whatever form, fashion, incarnation, whether it was under the government of the late Prime Minister Patrick Manning, or in this instant in the incarnation of the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. So whether it was the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Bill of 2010, the Revenue Authority Bill of 2018, the Revenue Authority Bill of 2019, and the Revenue Authority Bill of 2021, which is to be debated in the Parliament of this country this coming Tuesday in the Upper House, it is our position that we are not in support of this particular entity. And this morning, there are a number of issues that I have to raise. Because whatever version of this particular piece of legislation, the conversation that surrounded it was based on the principle of the 3/5 majority. Save and except in this particular scenario that will be debated on Tuesday, it will have no longer a 3/5 majority. It will be passed, or all that will be needed is a 3/5 majority, or sorry, a simple majority. And this reeks again of an attack on the Constitution, the democracy, the Parliament, and the parliamentary process. And we have to ask the question, why this sinister, snakish, elitist, clandestine Prime Minister, Attorney General, and Minister of Finance would want to tamper with the bill, making it into one that now requires a simple majority. And you have to understand that against the backdrop or the track record of this government over the last 6 years into their 7th year, where their focus has been on undermining the power and supremacy of the parliament. It is really making a mockery of the democratic process, and this has been clearly demonstrated not only in this particular approach to the TTRA bill that will be debated on Tuesday, but if you go back to what they did with the amendments to the Strategic Security Services Act in 2016, and also as it relates to tampering with the 3/5 majority which was needed as it relates to the marriage bill. So the government is again on this very dangerous dictatorial road, and one can only conclude that it cannot credibly engage the opposition and the public in a manner which engenders confidence in the government and national support for whatever plans that they may have in relation to their legislation or their legislative agenda. And what has emerged here in their very first act in this second session of the 12th Parliament, that the government is on a road of attacking the Constitution, undermining the Parliament and the democracy of the country. And I want to ask the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, the Attorney General, and the Minister of Finance, what is the policy which would have guided this piece of legislation that will come before the Parliament this Tuesday? What has happened to the Cabinet note dated the 9th of February 2017, in which the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago agreed with an organization named CARTAC, the acronym CARTAC, which was commissioned by the International Monetary Fund, which made recommendations to the government of the approach which should be pursued by the government as it relates to the TTRA. And there were 4 options available as it relates to tax administration in Trinidad and Tobago. Option A, the Revenue Authority. Option B, an integrated revenue administration in the Ministry of Finance. Option C, a revenue ministry. And option D, an enhancement of the existing status quo. Has the government fully ventilated these 4 options with stakeholders within the fraternity of tax administration, and as it relates to revenue administration and tax administration? The bill, as I said, which is to be debated on Tuesday, must be clearly seen in the context of the blatant abuse of authority and power at the expense of people's rights, and as I have said, an open assault on the Constitution of the country and an attack on the democracy of this country. And I say so because we have to understand what is being done here. This bill, which interferes significantly with property rights and privacy rights, is protected under Section 4 and 5 of the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago. So it is very clear in terms of the bill is impacting upon privacy and property rights, which is protected by Section 4 and 5 of the Constitution. And what will emerge is Imbert's Revenue Authority, because there's no independence to the authority or the Board of Management. But I'll say more on this particular issue. But it is important to understand in terms of the Constitution and the democracy what has been emerging in this country. And this morning, I want to ask members of the media today as it relates to, because the TTRA and what they are doing will erode the Public Service Commission and trample on or undermine the Public Service Commission. And it is important that members of the media understand what is happening, because in recent times the Police Service Commission has apparently become a tool of the PNM, where the commission seems to be taking orders. I don't know, I am asking the question, is it taking orders from the Prime Minister? And in that context, I want to ask the Prime Minister this morning if he, or what role has he played in undermining the independence of the Autonomous Police Service Commission. And members of the media in Trinidad and Tobago, we must never forget that the current chairman of the Police Service Commission, one Ms. Bliss Sipasad, was a former director of the Chagaramas Development Authority. And we must never forget who appointed the directors of the Chagaramas Development Authority. It is at the behest of the Prime Minister, and who is in charge of the cabinet, and he is also the political leader of the People's National Movement. So when he appointed her to chair the Police Service Commission, she was more or less serving two masters at the time: Her Excellency the President and the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And this must be seen further in what is unfolding in our country, because again, members of the media, I want to ask the Prime Minister, is he aware who instructed the Police Service Commission to retain a former member of the judiciary to investigate or probe allegations as it relates to senior members of the police service accepting bribes to facilitate the granting of firearm users license? Was this within the remit of the Police Service Commission, or was it done legally or illegally? And I come back to the very important issue, but we have to understand the happenings in our society from within recent time. This TTRA bill, the government, through its high-handed and dictatorial action, is attempting to expand contract employment within the police service, the public service, sorry. And I am asking what will become of the Public Service Commission as it relates to its role, because in the Customs and Excise and in the Board of Inland Revenue, very clearly it is spelled out in terms of Chapter 9 of the Constitution, appointments to and the tenure of office in terms of the Public Service Commission, that in terms of Section 121, the Public Service Commission has the power in terms of the Constitution to appoint persons to hold or act in offices to which this section applies, including the power to make appointments on promotion, transfer, and to confirm appointments, and to remove and exercise disciplinary control over persons holding or acting in such offices, and to enforce the standards of conduct of such officers shall vest in the Public Service Commission. And this morning I want to ask Dr. Keith Rowley, the Prime Minister, and his entire cabinet, what is his position as it relates to the expansion of contract labor within the public service? Because their manifestos, especially the one in 2015, made a very clear pronouncement as it relates to the expansion. They were committed to a reduction of contract employment in the public service, and in fact their former Minister of Labor, I do not know where she is at this point in time, Jennifer Baptiste-Primus, berated the expansion of contract labor within the public service, saying, or made the pronouncement, that it undermined the workers' dignity and that of their families with no security of tenure, and they had no opportunity to get into financial arrangements from the point of view of loans and mortgages for housing and motor vehicles and education and health issues as it relates to their relatives and dependents. And this too goes against the grain of the decent work agenda to which Trinidad and Tobago is a signatory to and as a member of the International Labour Organization. So the Prime Minister, who is the political leader of the PNM, and the Minister of Finance, who is the chairman of the PNM, must their actions as it relates to the creation or wanting to create the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority must be seen from the point of view of a blatant abuse of authority and power and a direct overreach, where now the political arm will seek to employ party supporters, sympathizers, friends, party hacks, and so on, who may not possess the relevant qualifications and expertise to take charge of the very critical and sensitive areas as it relates to tax administration, revenue generation, and so on, from the point of view of the Board of Inland Revenue and Customs and Excise. And the further question has to be asked members of the media, whether now the public service, as I said, which is insulated, which has been insulated and offers that protection to public officers from political interference and manipulation, is the government of Trinidad and Tobago undermining and destroying the Public Service Commission as it relates to the creation of the public service, as it relates to the creation of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. Because the UNC is of the opinion that, as I said, there will be no independence, and from the point of view of the employees, they will be at the total behest, manipulation, control. They can be coerced to do the political bidding of the runaway Prime Minister and his Minister of Finance. And this, for me, represents, in addition, because the relevant clauses of the legislation, for example, clause 7.2 of the proposed legislation, this Board of Management is to be appointed by the Minister of Finance, and the appointment of board members, they shall be on terms and conditions of the Minister of Finance, and this is clearly spelled out in clause 10 subsection 3 of this particular piece of legislation. And in addition, I am forced to ask the question, because the Customs and Excise Division is a very important area. It has powers of arrest. It has the power to detain and also engage in seizure and search and so on. Will this now be placed under a private entity that falls under the political control of the Minister of Finance? So we can see the emergence probably of a mongoose gang within the framework of tax collection and so on in Trinidad and Tobago, and the very sensitive issue of person's tax information in Trinidad and Tobago. What is the real agenda of the government? And there are a number of labor matters that are within this particular scenario too, that has to be posed to the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister. Because will it now be another Petrotrin where all the employees, the 2,000 plus employees at the Board of Inland Revenue and Customs and Excise, will they be dismissed in one broad swoop? And there is a question of trust, because clause 15 clearly spells out where it will provide for the it will, not clause 15, but clause 18, sorry, would enable public service officers to exercise within 3 months of the date of coming into force of the proposed act an option to voluntarily retire from the public service or to transfer to the authority with the approval of the Public Service Commission. 2. Be appointed on transfer by the Public Service Commission to a suitable public office in the Enforcement Division, or to remain in the public service, provided, and I want officers of the Board of Inland Revenue and officers of Customs and Excise to focus on what I'm saying, or to remain in the public service, provided that an office consummate with the office held by the officer in the public service is available. So if there is no post that is available for you, you will be dismissed. So will this be another Petrotrin where it will be all? And this is a question that you cannot trust this government and the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister said that the government was not closing down Petrotrin. He said that if you had your head in the freezer, close the door and listen to him, that the government was not closing down Petrotrin. It must be seen too in a very clear manner as a brazen attack and an outright attack on the collective bargaining process, because in the new entity that will be the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, will there be a role for collective bargaining? Will there be a role for successorship as it relates, because the existing employees at the monthly paid and the daily rated levels, they are represented by the Public Service Association and the National Union of Government and Federated Workers. And nowhere in the clauses of this existing or the proposed piece of legislation is there a clause which will facilitate successorship for the Public Services Association or the National Union of Government and Federated Workers. So for me, it is an outright attack on the collective bargaining process. It is an outright attack on the existence of trade unions in the 21st century. And in that context, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it must be seen as an ongoing assault on the labor movement as it relates to the actions of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And from that angle, ladies and gentlemen, it must also be seen, or the question has to be asked, what will become of the pension benefits of the employees at the Board of Inland Revenue and also at the Customs and Excise, because clause 22 states that it would require the board to establish a pension fund or a pension fund plan for the officers and employees of the authority within 2 years of coming into force of the proposed act. Now I want you to just think about the Minister of Finance and his budget presentation for 2020 in and around October of 2019, when he stated that, Madam Speaker, I propose to review the public service pensions with a view to indexing these pensions at an appropriate level. This review will be completed in fiscal 2020, and as it relates to the daily paid public servants, the PNM, and I quote, this PNM intends to solve this outstanding problem once and for all in order to provide economic relief and to offset the daily paid expenses of retired daily paid workers going forward. I now propose that daily paid workers in the public service, that there will be a contributory pension plan similar to the contributory health plan already in force for public sector workers. Further details of this measure will be given in the Finance Act in December of 2019 and in the new pension plan for daily paid workers will take effect in 2020. Up till today, daily paid workers in the local government service have no idea what is the status of their pension plan. And this is why there are a number of issues in this particular piece of legislation that must be ventilated in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And if the PNM cannot provide the answers, and clearly they will be unable to provide the answers, and there will be no independence as it relates to the creation of Inwards Revenue Authority, then it is very clear that the opposition will maintain its position. Historically, we are against the Revenue Authority because it will add to the employment levels in the country. 120,000 persons have lost their jobs over the last 6 years under Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. And it is very clear, ladies and gentlemen, that based on the actions and what is contemplated by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, that the government does not want trade unions on the streets. The government does not want the leadership of unions to speak out on the proposed Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. The government does not want unions and their membership to congregate and put their dissent, to put their voices of opposition against what is being rolled out from a policy point of view in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And that leads me to the very important point that we must now understand what is the real agenda of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley as it relates to the extension of the state of emergency. It was not one of vaccinating you and reducing the mortality rate in the ICU intensive care unit at the Cooper Hospital and our public health system and so on. It was one of shutting down voices of dissent and opposition. It was one of wanting to roll out the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. It was one of wanting to implement the property tax, and they do not want the voices of protest and opposition on the streets of Trinidad and Tobago. And today, I warn the officers or the employees at the Customs and Excise and the Board of Inland Revenue and the leadership of the Public Services Association and the National Union of Government and Federated Workers and the citizenry, the tax-paying public of Trinidad and Tobago, the government's real intention for extending the SOE was to roll out policy position and bring it to the Parliament of this country, undermine the three-fifths majority protection, undermine the constitution of this country, and use that SOE so that they could continue to feel that they have the population in a state of submission, and they will do what they want because they possess the parliamentary majority, and they will use the police and the law enforcement agencies if voices of opposition take to the streets of Trinidad and Tobago in making their position clear on these important and critical issues. These are the actions of a desperate Prime Minister and a Minister of Finance who has not been able to meet all the expectations of his last 6 budget presentations. We must never forget in February of 2021 that the Minister of Finance said that Trinidad and Tobago, after 4 months into fiscal 2021, that he had a budget deficit of $2 billion. And in the first 4 months of fiscal 2021, taxes on incomes and profits were down by $436 million, while non-tax revenue was down by $1.43 billion, and profits from state enterprises were down by $22 million. So these are the actions of a desperate Prime Minister, a desperate Minister of Finance, a desperate cabinet, and a high-handed and dictatorial government who is prepared to beat the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago into a state of submission and acceptance through an extension of the state of emergency. And this is the real agenda of the PNM. I thank you.
Okay, that's a good question. Alright, so you're saying the electoral districts were divided unfairly and to the PNM's advantage. How would you say it should have been done in order to create the most equitable division?
Yeah. So there are 2 instances how it should have been done. A complete overhaul of the island's boundary should have been done, because now you're arranging the entire electoral district of the entire island. When you look at what happened in the map, you only see that there were only adjustments taking place on one end of the island, when there are large electoral districts on this end of the island also. You could see the geographical space also in terms of how big these electoral districts are. So that's one. You look at doing an entire overhaul of the island, and then if we take the approach from what the EBC outlined, in that they were using the existing electoral districts with the higher number of electorate to then divide the seats into various numbers. There were when I was speaking of District 15, District 15 was Providence. Sorry, when they finished District number 13 and 14, the 2 seats with the higher number of electorate was Providence and Goodwood, but they didn't divide these 2 like what they would have done in District 14 and 15. What they went is that they went into another red district and a strong opposition seat for the PNM and Tobago, and divided that district. So it shows that there's inherent inconsistency and some level of bias with respect to the boundary division, because you can't on one hand say that you were using the highest electorate, and when you reach district number 15, you use a completely different method, saying that you don't want to fragment communities. The mere division of boundaries is not fragmenting a community. For example, in the constituency of Chaguanas West, the Chaguanas main road is the division between Chaguanas West and Couva North. The Chaguanas market actually is in the constituency of Couva North. So you can't come and say that you're going to fragment the community so that you're not using the higher number of electorate anymore. And we have to understand that they use 6 seats that the PNM want to create 9 seats that the PNM shows the number, show that they would have an advantage in.
Alright, my next question, I was just wondering if I can get your thoughts on the matter of Muslim leaders about his threats against them, and specifically the education ministry.
Sure. That matter is, I saw reports, is actively engaging the TTPS, and I wish not to comment on that matter because that is an ongoing investigation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, members of the media. This morning we have had a very comprehensive input from my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Sabah Barataria, Saddam Hussein, as it relates to the Election and Boundaries Commission's draft order as it relates to the creation of 3 additional seats in the Tobago House of Assembly. which will be debated in the Parliament, the House of Representatives, this coming Wednesday. And I'm sure that, as I have done this morning, we are committed to exposing the real agenda of the PNM in terms of their legislative agenda and how they are eroding and assaulting the Constitution and the Parliament of this country, and what is their real agenda as it relates to the extension of the state of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago. And we will continue as a committed and loyal opposition to fulfill our duties and responsibilities to the people within the parliamentary framework and outside of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.